It's 9:30 here. Oh, hello everybody. I'd like to welcome you all. My name is Páraic Finnerty, and I am the president of the Emily Dickinson International Society. I'm co-hosting this event with former EDIS president Jonnie Guerra. This Dickinson poetry reading is dedicated to Eleanor Heginbotham. Ellie loved the Emily Dickinson International Society, and the Emily Dickinson International Society loved Ellie. We have awarded her a posthumous Distinguished Service Award. We've also set up, so maybe we could unmute, sorry. What was I saying? Oh yeah. We've awarded her a posthumous Distinguished Service Award this year, and we've also set up a memorial fund in her honor. Today, Jonnie and I have assembled some of her friends and colleagues from the Emily Dickinson International Society and also her daughter, Robin, and we're really, really thrilled that you're here with us today, Robin. So I'm going to name the readers today, and then I'm going to turn over to Jonnie, and she's going to say a few words about Ellie. So our readers today, and this is the order in which we're going to read the poems. We're not going to tell you the poems at the moment. We're going to surprise you with the poems. We've got Martin Nell Smith, Dan Manheim, Ryan Cull, Jonnie, Robin, Cindy MacKenzie, Elizabeth Petrino, Jane Eberwein, Cristanne Miller, Nancy List Pridgen, me, Ivy Schweitzer, Paul Crumbley, Vivian, Pollak. So I'm really, really excited for us to begin our readings, but I'm going to turn to Jonnie to say a few words about our friend Ellie.
Thank you, Páraic. And I have to say that this poetry reading was Páraic's inspiration. And I feel greatly privileged that he asked me to co-host with him. Since the theme has been connection, I thought I would begin by telling you about how Ellie and I first met. It was at a poetry reading in 1983 at Mount Vernon College. I was running a poetry contest for high school students in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. And it will be no surprise, Ellie was our contact at Stone Ridge Country Day School, and she was the person who selected and sponsored Stone Ridge's participant. On that particular Friday afternoon, Ellie and I were both wearing pleated plaid skirts, identical except in different colors. However, we soon discovered that we had many more things in common than where we shopped and our taste in clothes. Certainly, key among them was Emily Dickinson, and then, of course, also the Washington, D.C. cultural scene. You know that Ellie had a voracious appetite for life and friendship. And there would be no better day for Ellie if it didn't include 4 or 5 lunches, events, including readings or plays or films. I have no idea how many readings Ellie and I attended together, sometimes in the company of Doug Evans or other friends. And when my time in the DC area ended in 1992, Ellie and my friendship did not. In fact, Mike and I were most fortunate to visit with Ellie for several hours on November 9th. And during that visit, we shared many memories, and I was also able to share with her birthday wishes that had appeared on Facebook that she hadn't yet seen. Jane Eberwein did such a wonderful chronicle of what Ellie contributed to both EDIS and Dickinson studies that I certainly can't improve on that masterful account. But I do want to say, and I know that all of you share this feeling with me, that Ellie was an extraordinary person and friend, and almost all of us, if not all, were the beneficiary of her hospitality and her generosity. She would be so delighted with the lineup of readers this afternoon. Truly, I believe Ellie would echo what Dickinson said, "My friends are my estate." I'll now turn the program over to Martha Nell, who is going to lead off the reading.
Thank you, Jonnie. That was absolutely beautiful and wonderful. I met Ellie a little after you did. I was hired at the University of Maryland in 1986, and after the search committee and a couple of my colleagues at Maryland, Ellie was the first person to greet me. I'm living in Ocean Gate, New Jersey, and I get this letter from Ellie welcoming me to the University of Maryland. Was she a professor? No, she was a student, but it was great. And when we first got here, she and Erlen had us to dinner and stuff. It was marvelous. So we were friends. And then I had the great honor of directing her dissertation, which meant that I learned from her while she directed herself. And my name was on as director, but I learned so much from Ellie. And the reason I mention that is because every now and again, Ellie would come to me and ask for professional advice. It wasn't often, but it happened from time to time. And she said, not too long ago, she said, "It really bothers me. I see this and I'm not properly quoted in it." And I said, "Ellie, I'm going to give you the advice that you would give me. What would you give me if I said that?" She looks at me, and she had Robin that turban on her head that she wore the scarf wrapped. She looks at me and she said, "Oh, Martha Nell, you know what I'm going to say." And I said, "Yeah, it doesn't matter." And she said, "Yeah, because it's important that the work and the knowledge is out there." And that was so Ellie. Celebrate that. Enjoy that. And before I read the poem that she and I enjoyed so very much, I will simply say, lest there be any doubt that Ellie would not have a problem with Taylor Swift, or at least she told me she didn't. She said, "Do you think Taylor Swift and Emily Dickinson are related?" And I said, "Does it matter?" I said, "It's like as artists they're related." She said, "Yeah, I agree." So, and Ellie and Erland, I can't remember if I told you this, Robin, but we did so many cultural things, not necessarily together, but we ended up at the same places like the Kennedy Center or the Boulder Shakespeare Library or wherever around here. That Mary Lee, my partner, whom I think many people on this call know, she says, "There are those crazy kids again. I see them right over there." So she nicknamed them the crazy kids.
The
They knew
crazy
it.
kids.
Yeah, that and it's true. It fits perfectly. So, and about the previous anecdote, she told me, she said, "That's not a happy thing," because she wrote me about it afterwards, even though I don't know if I don't know what happened. Anyway, um, but there are joys, and she had art in all caps. So, this is a poem that Ellie and I shared many times. And it, is about Dickinson, a tribute to another woman poet, a tribute to the wonder of poetry and to being deeply engaged with the world, and a tribute to the way that one sees differently when one sees through poetry. I think I was enchanted when first, a somber girl, I read that foreign lady. The dark felt beautiful. And whether it was noon at night or only heaven at noon, for very lunacy of light, I had not power to tell. The bees became as butterflies, the butterflies as swans, approached and spurned the narrow grass, and just the meanest tunes that nature murmured to herself to keep herself in cheer, I took for giants practicing Titanic opera. The days to mighty meters stepped, the homeliest adorned, as if unto a jubilee, 'twere suddenly confirmed. I could not have defined the change, conversion of the mind, like sanctifying in the soul, is witnessed, not explained. 'Twas a divine insanity. The danger to be sane, should I again experience, 'tis antidote to turn to tomes of solid witchcraft, magicians be asleep. But magic hath an element like deity to keep. Ellie's magic is still very much with us. And it has everything to do with the way of seeing the world, with generosity and giving and loving. And when I grow up, I want to be Ellie Heginbotham.
I guess we're just going to go from one person to another. I'll just briefly say Ellie was one of the first people who greeted me and made me really feel like I belonged in the society. And we very quickly found that my son was then in college at Worcester, where she went and in fact was living in the dormitory where she lived as a senior, and they had very different experiences. This is a poem that I've looked at just as a interesting nature poem, and it just dawned on me a few days ago that it's actually an elegy, or can be read as one. The mountains stood in haze. The valleys stopped below and went or waited as they liked, the river and the sky. At leisure was the sun, his interests of fire a little from remark withdrawn. The twilight spoke the spire. So soft upon the scene the active evening fell, we felt how neighborly a thing was the invisible.
I think I'm the next on the list. I didn't know Ellie as well as most, or maybe all, of the readers here, but even as a relative newcomer, I immediately appreciated her welcome, recognized her insights. I already knew about her book on the fascicles, for example, and appreciated her deep commitment to EDIS. So I'm happy to participate in honoring her legacies. And I should mention as well that this morning at the research circle, she was remembered by a few people as well. And so I don't have a single favorite poem by Dickinson, though I've been thinking a lot about this one, Of Being as a Bird. And I'll just say a few other real quick words of introduction to it. We rightly associate Dickinson with difference, many different forms of difference, and necessarily so. But sometimes we risk overlooking how often she thinks about what is deeply, maybe even like ontologically shared at the level of being. This is a poem that invites us toward that task and maybe toward the ground of being itself. Its slippery syntax, unclear reference, tumbling rhythm may seem like a warning about this line of inquiry. Generalizing is risky when we're talking about what we share at the level of being, but it's a playful poem and it's ecstatic in its search for music that matches the music that accompanies the birds, and that maybe also serves as a model for other musics that allow us to accompany each other. And so I thought that was perhaps a suitable topic for the person we're celebrating today. Of being is a bird, the likest to the down, an easy breeze do put afloat the general heavens upon. It soars and shifts and whirls and measures with the clouds in easy, even, dazzling pace. No different the birds, except a wake of music accompany their feet, as did the down emit a tune for ecstasy of it.
The poem that I chose is one that has a special meaning to Ellie and me because we both loved Linda Paston. We loved Linda Paston's poetry. We attended many of her readings. And when I interviewed Linda Paston long ago, 1989, she told me that this particular poem was the first one that she ever shared publicly in a classroom, and it was the first one she memorized, and she could still recite it at the time. It also has some resonance with a poem that was featured in the letters panel earlier. The crickets sang and set the sun, and workmen finished one by one their seam the day upon. The low grass loaded with the dew, the twilight stood as strangers do, with hat in hand, polite and new, to stay as if or go. A vastness as a neighbor came, a wisdom without face or name, a peace as hemisphere at home, and so the night became.
Somebody will have to tell me when it's my turn.
It's your turn.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I didn't have the schedule in front of me. So I chose this poem because it's the first poem that I had read of by Emily Dickinson, and it was when I came to St. Paul, Minnesota, to help my mother with her Emily Dickinson conference here. I think the first one she did here. And I wanted to be ready with at least one poem. And I happened to pick one that suited me at the time because I was in the middle of a midlife crisis. I had left home, a marriage, a job. And Ellie was like, well, come visit me in Minnesota. I have a job for you to do. So I read this poem and it seemed to suit me very well at the time because it's sort of like midlife crisis, but in a very Emily-like way. And at the time I had memorized it. And by the way, all of the poems that you all are reading tonight is the first time for me to hear many of them. So thank you for the selection. This poem starts with each life converges to some center. Each life converges to some center, expressed or still. Exists in every human nature a goal. Admitted scarcely to itself, it may be too fair, for credibility's temerity to dare. Adored with caution as a brittle heaven to reach, were hopeless as the rainbow's raiment to touch, yet persevered toward, sure for the distance, how high unto the saint's slow diligence the sky. Ungained it may be by a life's slow venture, but then eternity enables the endeavoring again. Excuse me, a little tear.
Well, I'm going to lighten the mood a bit and just remember that meeting in St. Paul where I met Robin. And of course, Ellie had thrown herself enthusiastically into the creation of the meeting. And, Erland was busy running the van from the airport back to the hotels and back again with I remember he had a Christian music station on, and it was just rocking this music. And Erland was sort of in a world of his own, I think, as the Uber driver. But was there ever a man that adored his wife as much as Erland did? You could just see it on his face. It was so wonderful. But those are the kind of moments I absolutely adored her enthusiasm for virtually everything. And the final, so one time it was quite comical because it was right to the last event of the meeting where basically she was summarizing and thanking people. And she headed up to the stage, of course, immaculately dressed, hair coiffed beautifully, makeup precise. And as she strode across the stage, one of the heels on her shoes broke off, and she did a major skid, practically in a straight skirt, and anyway, I remember, Chris, you actually had to save the day because she was kind of disheveled for a few minutes. But she used to invite me down to Washington all the time because she said, let's get into some good trouble, in order to borrow John Lewis's expression. And I said, well, it's a fairly big venture for me to get down to Washington. But she says, well, then meet me in Cape Breton. Meet me in Banff. She'd plan all these things. And one of my biggest regrets is that we didn't sort of have that holiday time. But really, was not being with Ellie a holiday? The warmth of that woman, just the enthusiasm, the generosity of praise for your paper or some idea you had, or a joke or whatever it was. I just absolutely loved being around her. I've told people she just made me sparkle. And I just never forget it. So I chose kind of a quiet meditation on summer because I think it represents Ellie. And if you know the poem, it's about the passing of the season. But I think it's a beautiful meditation. As imperceptibly as grief, the summer lapsed away. Too imperceptibly at last to seem like perfidy. A quietness distilled as twilight long begun, or nature spending with herself sequestered afternoon. The dusk drew earlier in. The morning foreign shone, a courteous yet harrowing grace, as guest that would be gone. And thus, without a wing or service of a keel, our summer made her light escape into the beautiful. Love that woman.
Thank you, Cindy. That was wonderful. I, like others here, feel privileged that I had the opportunity to get to know Ellie and Erland. Both of them were, as Dan said, very welcoming to me when I first arrived in the society, as were others. Ellie had a kind of shine about her, as everyone is saying. She was filled with, I thought, a sense of just generosity, openness, the opposite of any type of worry about herself or her career. She was somebody who was focused really on the beauty of what we do, which is really helping other people become empowered to become the best people, the best readers, the best writers that they can be. I have to say that I could also always, not only did I feel privileged to get to know Ellie, first through her scholarship, but even more so through her generosity and warmth as a person. I could also, I think no one has mentioned this yet, expect to receive a letter from Ellie at some point. And these were not emails and they weren't texts. They were either typed or handwritten letters, which often came with photographs. And so I also treasure these letters, which I often go back to. And as we all know, it's just the most eloquent writer who would also just talk about the kind of the joys that we had together, that we had just shared, and the ones that she looked forward to. So in my case, I chose a poem that to me represents that sense of love. And it's from Fascicle 21, which also appears in Ellie's book, Reading the Fascicles of Emily Dickinson, Dwelling in Possibilities. And in some ways, I find it a very solemn poem, but the theme of love just seemed perfect to me to express Ellie. It's also an optimistic poem in certain ways that suggests just joining another person and helping them on their journey might lead to fulfillment for both, which might or might not ever be realized. But for me, that embodies her graciousness. Love, thou art high. I cannot climb thee. But were it two, who knows but we, taking turns at the Chimborazo, ducal, at last stand up by thee. Love, thou art deep. I cannot cross thee, but were there two, instead of one, rower and yacht, some sovereign summer, who knows but we'd reach the sun? Love, thou art veiled. A few behold thee. Smile and alter and prattle and die. Bliss were an oddity without thee, nicknamed by God, eternity.
And Jane, you ready, Jane? I can see Jane.
Jane, you may need to unmute.
Yes.
You can hear me now? Video? Can you see it? Okay. Well, thank you all. One of Ellie's teaching activities with Vivian was trying to teach me to use this technology. They did not complete with the speed. But I think so much. I mean, I'm sure all of us are going to have anything about when we first Ellie as a speaker. So it was at our first conference in Washington. She was the person who was organizing a group of her students to then a registration. And it was just wonderful for doing that. You can imagine how welcoming it was to Ellie getting up and that occasion. You know, over the years, we've had so many experiences together. So what I want to talk about today is a particular turn our friendship book in relatively late years. Yeah, we have had so many good times together with so many different events and other events. But then life goes in, and this is how it goes. Finally lost both the sister and father of the 2 years and the husband, Sarah. And I lost my husband, Bud. And we took to having long phone visits. And those were very exciting for both of us. No two understand and take them to have a serious thought. And one of the conversations had to do with poems suited to memorials. And I told her the poem, the Dickinson poem, I wanted read at my funeral, and make sure that this happened. And so this is the poem. Surprisingly, this is one that Ellen didn't remember, even though it was in the fascicles. That's the time feels so vast that were it not for stillness, I fairly wish to comfort embrace my final specific stages with the prayer that processes of song that is the endless beauty of insanity. And out against those processes of skies, at processes of reduction, like light goes in, unless it goes in our belly, but there is that hope that must have been part of our consciousness, those daughters and this tremendous work that is taught.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you.
It's such a delight for me to hear everyone's stories about Ellie. I'm like you, feel privileged to have been a part of her life, a small part of her life. I'm reading a short, I guess you would say mostly comic poem, but it reminds me, let's say, of Ellie's generosity, humility, intellectual imagination, enthusiasm, warmth, and self-confidence. I send 2 sunsets. Day and I in competition ran. I finished 2 and several stars, while he was making 1. His own was ampler, but as I was saying to a friend, mine is the more convenient to carry in the hand.
I love that.
I do too. I met a lot of you in Boulder in 1998, and I really, really remember being so welcomed by Ellie and Erland and by Jane and Bob. And I just really have wonderful memories. Emily reading her poem and just here's Jonnie. It's like I can play that whole drama to myself these days. And I've got memories too about a trip to England where we spent part of the time with Ellie and Erland, and we have had dinner with them and cards and letters with pictures. A lot of good memories that y'all have been sharing. But one thing that Ellie taught me, one day I told her I found a pun in a Dickinson poem. And she looked at me amused and said, "That's true about just about every Dickinson poem there is." And I don't know whether I thought that was an exaggeration. But since then, I've been looking and I found this one, which seemed to describe a sunset. It has three puns in it. And maybe she was right. Delight could also be the light of the sunset. Pain, spelled Pain, has to do also with the pain that she was looking through to see the mountain in amber. And the skies could be disguised. The life becomes pictorial when viewed through pain, more fair because impossible that any gain. The mountain at a given distance in amber lies. Approached, the amber flits a little, and that's the skies, or maybe disguise. Thank you.
Thank you all so far for these brilliant readings and these brilliant memories. So I'm not going to reiterate what everybody's saying about Ellie being kind, but I always think of gentleness, and that's where you make somebody feel better about themselves when you talk to them. And for me, Ellie was a very gentle person, and she always made me feel better about myself. I've chosen a poem about the way artists and poets transform their own experiences, often painful experiences, into artworks that benefit others. I believe that Ellie's scholarship, her teaching, but also her kindness is a legacy. And I would also include that legacy of gentleness that I always experienced anytime I spoke to her or interacted with her. The martyr poets did not tell, but wrought their pang in syllable. And when their mortal names be numb, their mortal faith encouraged some. The martyr poets never spoke, bequeathing rather to their work, that when their conscious fingers cease, some seek in art, the art of peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Páraic. I'm up next. Like Ryan, I got to know Ellie later in her life and more recently. But she welcomed me so warmly into the society and was such a generous, as people have said, a generous presence. I also want to talk about her scholarship because her work on fascicles, really important, and she's got a great essay on Paradise Lost, which I drew on for my post on Paradise, and I thought her work was incredibly insightful. So what a wonderful gift to have a huge heart and a incredibly brilliant brain. And the poem I selected, it's not necessarily a favorite of mine, but I felt like it somehow characterized her and characterized all women of her generation, I think, who had to be very bold um, in 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 sustaining, in evoking, in being the brilliant people they were. It wasn't always so cool for women to be smart. So this is it was given to me by the gods, which is F455. It was given to me by the gods when I was a little girl. They gave us presents most, when we are new and small. I kept it in my hand. I never put it down. I did not dare to eat or sleep for fear it would be gone. I heard such words as rich when hurrying to school from lips at corners of the streets and wrestled with a smile. Rich, 'twas myself was rich, to take the name of gold, and gold to own in solid bars. The difference made me bold. Thank you. And thank you, Ellie, for being bold.
So, Paul, whenever you're ready.
Paul, you need to unmute.
There we go. I had the extraordinary good fortune of working with Ellie on a collection of essays on the fascicles. And I'm sort of going to echo what Martha Nell said at the beginning and what Elizabeth said when they both indicated that Ellie was really about the work. I don't know how many of you have worked on essay collections, but they rarely conform to any kind of schedule, so that there's extraordinary series of frustrations and breakdowns in communication and the extended time for the completion of the project. And she was never for a minute in doubt about the outcome, and that the aim for her from the beginning was to get the work out there, to extend the discussion, and to do what was best for Dickinson and the contributing scholars. So the poem I chose is a poem about fame. I really couldn't help but think about fame when I was thinking about Ellie. Here it is. To earn it by disdaining it is fame's consummate fee. He loves what spurns him. Look behind. He is pursuing thee. So let us gather every day the aggregate of life's bouquet. Be honor and not shame. Thank you, Ellie.
So I guess I'm last, and I'm reading a poem about saying goodbye. It's a real pleasure to get to gather with you all and to reflect on an extraordinary person, an extraordinary scholar, an extraordinary teacher. I've known Ellie for many years, and I felt like for each adjective that people were using, that I could give an example. And I think one I'd like to give, I'm not going to go back over all 13 of us, but Chris mentioned her self-confidence. And I just want to mention a couple of instances, actually in Washington, D.C., but one in Amherst, where she was so unflappable. I mean, that's, well, I think maybe it was Cindy who said something about Erland driving. Those of us who remember Erland as a driver remember it was a very special experience. And of course, he was doing a lot of driving in St. Paul for that wonderful event that Ellie, with, of course, great help from Robin, put together. So Ellie was as perhaps many of you know, a very enthusiastic driver. She also had, so far as I could tell, no sense of direction, and also didn't use a GPS. So, for example, when I was working in the Library of Congress, I would say this was, maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I'm not sure. We met and we had lunch at the Library of Congress. It was one of her favorite places. She went there when she could, which was very often, once a week, and she loved it. And then she offered generously to drive me back to my hotel. So there are a lot of one-way streets in downtown DC, and we were going, Ellie's a native and so forth. I know she was born in California, but she's as close to a DC native as anybody I knew. So she's driving round and round and round, and we're like rats in a maze. We just can't. So eventually, I thanked her very much, and I got out and I walked to my hotel. I'm not trying to claim it was 4 miles away. We were within, I don't know, maybe each time within 4 or 6 blocks of the hotel, and then we would come to a one-way street and so forth. Okay, so that's Ellie in DC, but perhaps, and I have another story. The last time I saw her there in Chinatown, she was having dinner with my husband, Bob, and me. And the question was where we had gotten there ourselves, but the question was, where was she going to park? There was no place to park. But the way she arrived, maybe after spending, I can't tell you how long she was spending looking for a place to park, but so ready to enjoy the dinner, not to let it affect her in any way, to go shopping on her way home. I don't know if this would have been 11 o'clock at night. She lived in Rockville. The energy was just extraordinary. But all right, these are all local examples. How about when she's coming to Amherst and she drove up from DC by herself? I'm going to put this as maybe, I don't know, 8 years ago. She got completely lost, arrived maybe 3-4 hours after she intended to, and most people would have just needed to collapse, and no, that wasn't the way. She was ready to go. So I'm reading a poem that unfortunately is the poem of goodbye. And I read it on a very sad occasion, which is when a student at Washington U left the world too soon. And it's filling my heart with joy to be able to read "Tie the Strings to My Life, My Lord," on an occasion when someone who has been so beloved also had such a rich and rewarding life in so very many ways. I'd also, before I read it, like to comment on her work on the fascicles and how an occasion such as this brings me back, can you see it, to a spectrum of possibilities. I looked in Ellie's book on the fascicles to see if she mentioned this, and she doesn't. But there's a wonderful essay in the collection that Paul and Ellie did together by Paula Bennett that wants to treat "Tie the Strings to My Life, My Lord," which is in fascicle 16, as an example of a persona poem in which a Civil War veteran is bidding the world a jaunty farewell. I, of course, don't read it like that, but the first line, tie the strings to my life, my lord. This occasion caused me to reflect again on, well, what kind of strings is she talking about, Emily Dickinson? And I had always assumed we're talking about imagining the self as a package, which is rather comical. And of course, one of the things about Dickinson, in addition to her openness, is her appreciation for structure and for the power of containment. So that resonated for me. But recently, in Chris's book, and for other reasons, the letters book, Chris and Donald's book, I was reading a very early letter of Dickinson's in which she discusses sewing strings onto what is presumably a dress for her mother, although I suppose it could be a corset. This is teenage Dickinson. But for this occasion, and under the power of Ellie's influence, I also think of the strings as the fascicle strings, and that this is dated by Franklin as perhaps summer 1862. I'm thinking maybe it's a little later, and maybe it's a meta commentary on the end of the heart of the fascicle project. Tie the strings to my life, my lord. This is Franklin 338, and again, it's fascicle 16. Tie the strings to my life, my lord. Then I am ready to go. Just to look at the horses, rapid. That will do. Put me in on the firmest side, so I shall never fall, for we must ride to the judgment, and it's partly downhill. But never I mind the steepest, and never I mind the sea, held fast in everlasting race by my own choice and thee. Goodbye to the life I used to live and the world I used to know, and kiss the hills for me just once, then I am ready to go.
Thank you so much, Vivian. But we've got a surprise for you. You're not the last reader.
Oh, sorry.
No, that was on the program. But Jonnie and I have arranged for Eliza Richards to read the last poem, and then we have another surprise. So, Eliza, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you for including me. And this has been very moving. So forgive me if I start crying right from the start. People have spoken of Ellie's welcome, and I'd just like to characterize that a little more. It was, for me, a very serious welcome and an orientation that went on for years. And I think of Ellie as a mentor and an advisor. I wasn't young when I joined the Emily Dickinson International Society, but I had a lot to learn. And over the years, I've thankfully gained in humility, and my gratitude has deepened over time. And when I first heard of Ellie's death, my response was sorrow that I didn't thank her in the way I wish I had. And I'll be forever grateful for her, both for her her way of her generous. She always erred on the side of generosity with her interpretations of people's actions, and she always worked for good. She was, people haven't mentioned, I'm trying to think of the things that other people haven't mentioned, and that's one. She was always trying to cultivate positive community for us, and she did that in really wise ways. And another thing I want to say is that she was extremely witty, understated, and honest.
in her assessments of things, and she had an amazing amount of knowledge about human nature and human behavior, and still was optimistic and generous with us all. So the poem that I want to read is kind of an excuse for not thanking her. It makes me feel better because it's about gratitude not being expressible. And so I'll read that for her and to her now. Gratitude is not the mention of a tenderness, but it's still appreciation out of plumb of speech. When the sea returned no answer by the line and lead, proves it there's no sea, or rather a remoter bed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eliza. Thank you. We have another surprise, but before we get to that surprise, I would like to just thank all the readers. This has been a really moving experience. We're going to have it on YouTube. You can watch it again. I'm really, really grateful to everybody, and particularly to Jonnie for helping me co-host this. Elizabeth, I don't know whether you're ready, but maybe you could introduce this, and maybe we could just close this event with this, and maybe you could introduce it to us, and then we could give this last word.
I know.
As it were.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll do a little introduction, so you know what's coming. In spring of 2025, I think I was inspired by Chris Miller's Dickinson seminar, which I had attended. And I decided that I would teach a seminar on Emily Dickinson to our upper division students at Fairfield University. And so I created the course, and one of the units was on the fascicles. So, of course, one of the first things I thought was, wouldn't it be wonderful now in this period after COVID to be able to begin to think about teaching a critical essay or a chapter on the theme of the fascicles? And so I invited Ellie to join us. And as always, Ellie was incredibly generous and wanted to make sure that the Zoom link would work. And so we worked on that, went back and forth, and did a dry run through. And she graciously agreed to come in April. And so she came, via Zoom, and she began by telling a wonderful story about one of her first research trips to the Houghton, where she told one of the librarians that she was interested in the fascicles. And she said, well, they brought me up into the Emily Dickinson room, and the librarian there opened up a closet door, and there were all kinds of green folders with the fascicles inside of them. So I was amazed by this. At that point, I realized I better start to record this meeting. For some reason, I had waited, and then it struck me, these are stories that are too good to pass up. The class, as you can imagine, was extremely memorable. We discussed her first book. We discussed how she became familiar with poetry. We discussed her father, who was a minister and who she said would quote poems and in his sermons. And then she also became familiar with poetry, she said, from memorizing and reciting poems at school. So I've selected just a very short clip, and this is Ellie in our class talking about, I think, as you'll see, a theme that kind of comes up in our conference, which has to do really with connecting and a question that one of the students asks. So I'm going to share this now. And in honor of Ellie, I'd like to offer us this clip. And can you all see that? Okay, perfect. So we'll go ahead.
21, what would it be? That's a good question.
Elizabeth, could you repeat that?
So Autumn is wondering, this is a question about your view of what Dickinson intended. She's wondering if you could ask Dickinson one question about that, what would it be?
Yeah, isn't that a question? Yeah, there are lots of questions like that. What was she up to? I tried to a little experiment for the book, not the dissertation. They wouldn't let me for the dissertation. And I sort of defied my editors for the book. I asked a bunch of poets how they put together a book. And there were two men for whom this was not true, Charles Wright and Richard Wilbur. But the women poets talked about getting down on the floor with a mess of poems on the floor and just picking out, And Dickinson has more than a few references to dust balls. I'm thinking of dust balls under the bed. I'm thinking of her up in that room at night, or in the daytime probably doing this because the light would be bad at night, and rummaging around a whole bunch of poems and choosing them. I remember this poem. This would be fun with this one. That's how I imagine her, and that's how most of the people who answered my little questionnaire described their own process of making a poem. But Autumn, I would like to ask her what she was up to, and also, did she ever send any of these books to anybody? Because she does make reference in letters to her little booklet and other expressions that make one wonder, what's she talking about? What is it that would be considered, something to send as a package rather than just a single poem to another person?
That's in honor of Ellie. And if anyone would like to see the full video, I'm happy to make it available. But
I know that I would. That was great.
I would too.
I am happy to share that.
Yeah, me too.
That's so I mean, I don't listen to me. It's just fantastic.
It is. It is. And the whole
Imagine
class.
trying to direct her dissertation. I just go do whatever you want, Ellie.
But the whole idea of making connections of the ball, all of it occurred to me afterwards that this was just so apt. But it was a joy, and to have her there and to have her talking about the fascicles was truly a gift. So yes, I'm happy to share that.
May I add that I used Ellie's chapter on the necromancy suite in my Dickinson class, the very last one I taught, and the students just absolutely loved it. And one of them came in after reading that essay, and she said, "I know Emily Dickinson was a witch, and I'm going to prove it." And I wrote to Ellie and I told her about that, and she got such a good laugh out of that. And I regretted later not having brought her in via Zoom with the class, but what a joy to have her work to share with students, and what a joy it's been to have her with us for this journey.
Yeah.
I'd like to say thank you to everybody for putting this on. I've known all of your names via Ellie or at the conferences or what have you, and I know how much she held you in her heart and in her esteem. She left an autobiography. I don't know. Some of you know that. I know, Martha, you know that. But
You're going to edit it.
I am. Well, and Grace Cavalieri took a stab. It was literally in her FedEx envelope unopened when I got to her unit, when she was already in the hospital. So I
Yeah.
know she didn't see the edits. I think at any rate, it's called That It Will Never Come Again, or no, it's called That's What Makes Life So Sweet, or something. And she was going back and forth on titles. And when she was in the hospital, she said, "What about whatever happens, happens, or whatever will happen," something like that. But each of the chapters starts with a line from Emily Dickinson and ties it to a particular point or aspect of her life. And I would be honored to share it with any of you who would want to take a glance or read it and make suggestions. I thought about publishing her original and then putting like a side commentary as a daughter uh, on like footnotes because I was there for her life and say from my perspective and have it be like a mother-daughter project posthumous. But let me know if anybody is interested in that. And thank you so much for letting me participate in this group that was her family. So
Thank you so much, Robin. I mean, and I'll text you, but I want to see that autobiography. Now, so Grace did edit a copy?
made a, she made a very quick read of it. I think she was in and out of a hospital herself.
Yeah, she
So
was.
she made very, you could tell she was in a hurry, but she did get through all of it, and her edits were pretty succinct and, mostly just little things. She took a lot of daddy out of the picture because it was a lot of daddy issues, and I agree with her on that. It should be more just Eleanor.
Yeah.
But I mean, daddy was her life, so.
Daddy, yeah. Well, as you know, we called them the crazy kids.
Well, I was meaning her father, but yes,
Dad, yeah. Well, that's a whole story too. I mean, good grief.
but since you all are all writers, if anybody were interested to make suggestive edits, Ellie left it for her kids and grandkids and friends and friends. All of you are all of that. But she didn't have any other suggestions. She didn't say try and get it published or do this or do that. So
It's publishable. I guarantee you.
Robin,
thanks.
she actually talked to Mike and me about this project and regret that it wasn't finished.
Yeah.
So
Good to hear that. I'm glad to know that.
yeah.
She said that to Mary Lee and me too. Mary Lee only went with me once. I went several times this year, but and she was so cute talking to Mary Lee and and telling her about her autobiography. And Emil was like, publish it, publish it. And I don't I don't remember you and Eric being there, but you may have been. You may have left the room for a while.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
Long stints, yeah. I don't know. I can't
Okay, well, you've convinced me I'm on a project.
yeah, it's your project. You've been called.
If it's okay, because it's getting time for my bed, I would just like to thank you all again. Dan, we're starting again for some people at 7 a.m. Eastern time and for breakout rooms. And then we have musicians wrestle everywhere at 8 a.m. Eastern time. Is that right?
Yes, the meeting proper will start again at 8 a.m. tomorrow. And that was really for the benefit of people, and several of the presenters are in China. And so it makes it at a civilized hour for them. The 7 o'clock, I may not get anybody in there, but I'll be in. And it was originally to have some extended conversations with people for whom the day's panels were not at a convenient time. So they were to be able to watch them on video. But we are struggling with the YouTube, with getting things posted on YouTube. That's going to probably happen later than we thought. But I'm still going to have the room open, and if anybody wants to come ahead.
Okay. good night from me, and rest of the day. I hope you have a nice time for the rest of your days. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye,
Páraic.
Páraic.